to illustrate the idea of dominance and recessiveness, we do Punnett squares. Okay? And so these Punnett squares illustrate how alleles, how dominant and recessive alleles are being passed on. And let's start with one of Mendel's first experiments. There are a few things to remember though. So with Punnett squares, it's really important that we remember that dominant traits are, or dominant alleles are denoted by uppercase letters or capital letters, and recessive alleles are denoted by lowercase letters. Okay, so the dominant and recessive alleles are case sensitive, and it's very important. And so the first thing we're going to try with the Punnett squares are true breeding plants. And so in one of Mendel's first experiments, he got two true breeding plants and he crossed them together. So these two plants, they're parent plant, we'll call them parent plants, and they have two alleles. Each have two alleles coding for purple flowers. And we'll give them capital P, capital P. We know that they're capital P, we know that they're dominant, because in Mendel's hybridization experiment, he deducted that the allele for purple flowers was dominant because it was present in each generation, and it was more prevalent than the expression of the allele for white flowers. So both of these plants haven't been cross-fertilized, and so therefore their alleles are both capital P and capital P. And to do Punnett squares, we draw a big box with 4 smaller boxes on the inside. And we get the alleles for each parent and we line them up. So let's say this parent here, we'll put their alleles up the top, and for this parent, we'll put their alleles on the side. So capital P, both of the alleles, capital P and capital P, both of the alleles for this plant. And if you remember your multiplication table from primary school, it's exactly the same thing. Just let me get a pen and I'll change the color to purple. So you just multiply them. So with this true breeding experiment, the offspring produced will have alleles capital P, 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 and capital P. Okay, so what this means is that if these two parent plants are fertilized, the offspring produced, all 4 offspring produced, will have alleles that are both capital P. Okay, so the genotype for that would then be 100%. Double capital P. Remember, genotype just means the genetic code or the allele, and phenotype means what is physically expressed. Okay? And because they all only have the dominant allele, all 100% of their offspring are going to be purple. Oops, sorry. All 100% of the offspring are going to express purple flowers. Okay, so that's one of the first experiments Mendel tried. And let's try this again with another experiment, another true breeding experiment. So we know that the white flowers, the genes or alleles being expressed as white flowers are recessive alleles. So the alleles for white flowers are little p, and we'll do the same thing with the Punnett square. We'll multiply them together, and what we'll get is very similar to the previous true breeding experiment, true breeding Punnett squares. All of the offspring produced by these two white flowers will have only recessive alleles. And so the genotype is again 100%, but this time it's 2 little p's. And the phenotype, what does it mean? The phenotype, that means if we crossbreed or artificially fertilize these two plants, 100% of their offsprings are going to have white flowers. Phenotype 100% white. Okay, so that's Punnett squares for true breeding. Now let's do a Punnett square for hybridization. Okay. And let's illustrate dominance and recessiveness through the Punnett squares. So hybridization, Mendel grabbed a purple flower pea plant and a white flower pea plant. And let's do the Punnett square. So the alleles for the purple flower pea plants, these haven't been crossed yet, so they're going to be capital P, and we'll put it at the top of the Punnett square here. The white flowers, they haven't been cross-fertilized either. They're still pure. So it's 2 little p's, we'll put them on the side here. And we'll do the same thing. We're just going to multiply them with each other. So capital P times little p. What we're going to get is capital P, little p. We always write the dominant allele first. Okay, because the dominant allele is what's going to be shown or what's going to be physically expressed. We write the allele for the dominant, we write the dominant allele first. And same thing here, capital P times little p. Capital P, little p. Again, capital P, little p, capital P, little p. And so the genotype for the offspring, for the F1 generation, okay, for F1 generation, the genotype is going to be 100% big P, little p. And what is the phenotype? Well, the phenotype is going to be all purple, 100% purple. And why, you might ask? It's because the allele for the allele for purple flowers is a dominant allele. So what's going to be expressed is the dominant allele, the purple flowers, the gene for purple flowers. Okay, even though they have an allele for white flowers, it's recessive. So recessive traits don't show through physical appearance if there is a dominant allele present. And the next interesting thing Mendel did was he had 2 offspring from this F1 generation and he cross-fertilized both of them together. And let's do a Punnett square for that. So to get the F2 generation, I'll just write that over here, F2. So to get F2 generation, he got 2 plants from the F1 generation and he crossed them together. So we found that the offspring from the F1 generation, all of their genotypes are big P, little p. And they're both purple plants. So their alleles, big P, little p, big P, little p, we'll just put them in the Punnett square again. And let's do the Punnett square. So big P times big P. We have 2 big P's. We have big P times little p. We'll have big P, little p. Big P times little p, big P, little p, and then the last one, 2 little p's. Okay, so what is the genotype? It's pretty interesting. Okay, so the genotype is 25% big P, It's also 50%, it's half. Half of the offspring are going to have alleles that are big P, little p. And the final offspring, the fourth one, is going to have two recessive alleles. So 25% little p's. Okay, and pardon my poor drawing skills with my mouse. So what's the phenotype? Well, the phenotype is going to be pretty interesting. Although we have 25% with only dominant alleles and 50% with both alleles, 75% of the offspring are going to express the dominant allele. So 75% of them are going to be purple. 75% of them are going to be purple, and 25% of them is going to be white. Okay, so that means somewhere along the line from these original true breeding parents, okay, so from these parents that haven't been cross-fertilized, somewhere along the line between the parents in the F2 generation, the recessive allele is being passed on, even though it's not necessarily being expressed through its phenotype. It is being passed on. It's just being overshadowed by the dominant allele because it has higher chances of being expressed through the phenotype. Okay, it's pretty interesting. Another thing that I forgot to mention. So the alleles that so the plants with alleles that have identical alleles, the term for that is homozygous. Okay, so this offspring here has alleles that are both identical. So this offspring is a homozygous species. This offspring here, although they're both recessive traits, or recessive alleles, this offspring is a homozygous species as well. And the word we use to describe species with both a dominant and a recessive allele is heterozygous. So this offspring here is heterozygous, and that offspring there is heterozygous as well. So you'll notice here that the F1 generation from this hybridization are all going to be heterozygous. And I've pardoned my crappy drawing here. Heterozygous. And that's because they have two parents who are both homozygous. However, each parent are homozygous with different alleles. So this purple parent here is homozygous with a homozygous species with two dominant alleles, whereas the white parent is a homozygous species with two recessive alleles. And along the line, as this F1 generation fertilizes with each other, they'll produce offspring, F2 generation, that have two homozygous species offsprings, two offsprings that are homozygous species, and another two offspring that are heterozygous species.